Luke Aguilar. Here. Dr. Kathleen Barlow. Joey Bryant.
Here.
Dr. Serafini.
Here.
Trey Justin.
Here.
Dr. Martin Kennedy. Here. Brittany Kinsella.
Here.
Elena Lunway.
Here.
Jacqueline Robinson.
Here.
Renee Skiles.
Here.
Brittany Stamnus.
Here.
Patrick Stanton.
Here.
Spencer Sutton.
Here.
Tom Wittron.
Here.
All right, moving on to approval of this week's agenda. If you could take a minute to review that. I'd like to entertain a motion to approve this week's agenda. Trey moves. Is there a second? Spencer seconds. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes. Moving on to the approval of last meeting's minutes. If you could take a minute to review that. I'd like to entertain a motion to approve last meeting's minutes. Spencer moves, Jacqueline seconds. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? Any abstentions? 2 abstentions. Motion passes. Moving on to reports. I don't have any reports.
I don't have any reports. I do have a little bit of follow-up when we get to some of the supplemental voting based on the outreach. Got one response and then the other never got a response back, but I'll get to that when we get there.
So out of the 150,000 that we earmarked for supplemental funding for this year, we have remaining 32,585 cents after the most recently approved supplemental request. Everybody's looking at that. Kind of an interesting spreadsheet, isn't it?
Could you zoom that in for us a little bit?
Try. So what this is showing is we started with 150, and this subtracts all the ones that were approved at the amount they were approved, not requested. Right now, of that amount, we have 32,580. And I said it was interesting because there's 200,000 in supplemental requests in front of us now, right? There's been some conversation about that situation and how it could work. I don't know if anyone wants to go into a refresher on that, or if this is the appropriate time.
I think if the committee did, this would be the appropriate time to go into that. And that if, as a reminder, point of information, if we did want to allocate more than the 32,000, the committee does have the ability that you all have to vote on to increase the supplemental funding for the year.
So I think the starting point is the suggested amount of 150,000 was chosen because that seemed to fit the pattern of the supplemental requests that were approved in the last couple of years. And we felt it would kind of meet the needs of the general ongoing recurring requests. And so we started with that. That, even back then in September, I remember, I think it was Dora, well, it might have been describing that, it might have been Andy, who knows what, but describing that 150,000 isn't necessarily, you know, the ceiling. It's not like once we spent that, we were absolutely out of money. And then a couple of other things have come up. One, that I mentioned last time is that this is the end of the 4-year cycle. And generally at the end of the 4-year cycle, because the rules say that it works this way, we take back unspent money from base funded programs if they haven't spent it. We don't really know the exact dollar amount that will be, but looking at what's happened in the last couple of years and looking at where we're sitting now, it could be $500,000. And, you know, that's money that we collected from students to provide services. And $500,000, again, seems like a huge amount of money, but it's really, you know, if you work out that we gave out $24 million over 4 years in base funding, $500,000 back is just a few percent. But it's got a lot of zeros on the end, right? So, you know, that creates an opportunity that the committee could choose to put some of that money to work. You know, in this role, I've only got one head, but I'm wearing about 3 hats. I think in this role, I'm supposed to be kind of sweet, right? Kind of, not sweet, Switzerland. Well, I'll be one of those Norwegian countries. Anyway, I'm not going to take a side, but I'm going to say that sometimes when there's, you know, this sort of, I guess you could call it a windfall, one thing that's common is looking for a long-term issue that you could use that money to solve. We don't necessarily need to save the money up. We're above all the reserve amounts that we need to keep according to the university policies. And in fact, because of some of the changes that are going on in those policies, the amount that we need to keep in reserves might be dropping. So we really don't need that $500,000. Now, that's not the same as me saying spend it necessarily on this, but for those of you that have been on the committee for a couple of years, I think last year we funded 2 or 3 tubas, pardon me, sousaphons. And that's because some of the sousaphones that they're using are from the 1930s, and then there's fiberglass ones from the 70s, which that's kind of a weird thing, but they have a great need, and they've come in for the base funding and asked for, I think it was $40,000 a year for the next 4 years to catch all of their equipment up to current modern standards. If we would have done it that way, which we probably could have afforded, it would have crowded out the amount that we were trying to keep with under 7.1 million. It might have caused us to make decisions to give other base funded programs slightly less. And they would have to wait 4 years to get new sousaphones or whatever. So that's kind of the situation we're at. I guess the end of that is you can spend more money. You can afford it. We can afford it. But it's up to you to recommend what you would choose to spend it on.
And I think the only thing I would add to that is that, and again, Pat can give you, if you all ask any questions of him, answers or recommendations on the financial side, is that you all just continue to be fiscally responsible. Even though we may have money available, does not mean we should be spending it all right at once. But supplemental funds really are meant to be used for when we have programs or services or needs that come up as one-time funding that you all value and think that we should put the money behind.
That's right.
And I may have missed
It's not
something.
no, it's not free money. It's,
Yeah. Did you introduce?
I
want to do that.
That's public comment.
It can fall under advisory report.
So, the other piece is that Dora left us a few, I guess 2 months ago maybe,
Yeah.
and we've gone through the search process, and we've decided the search committee's consensus was to hire Lacey. You want to stand or wave? Or Lacey Lampkins, and she's not new to the university. She's worked in the athletics department for, well, you can say this part. Go ahead.
You're doing so well.
Yeah.
So I came from the athletics department. I've been up there for about 8 years, so been on campus for a little while, but definitely excited to move into this world.
So she'll be taking over for Dora, which is for me, and she'll officially begin April 17th. So, welcome.
Are there any further reports?
That's all I have.
All right. Moving on to public comment first call. Mr. Shields.
Thank you.
So I wanted to just take some time to say thank you for your the recommendation for the S&A funding. In looking at that and moving it forward, I did take a few of the notices that you all indicated and shared with the provost some of the concerns specifically about the West Side advisor position. And so the provost and myself are committed to ensuring that we're looking at that very quickly to help make sure that those needs are met on the West Side. So I definitely appreciate that feedback regarding those process and look forward again to, again, continuing some of the great programs that you all have funded, so thank you. On a second note, I wanted to also come and, on behalf of the Dean of Students, just also come before you to request your support in a proposal that you've already has been presented to you, and that is of the Student Government and the Veterans Center to request to allow for them to maintain their funds forward, some of their funds forward. The university, in the process, Student Government has very quickly tried to absorb a program for a memorial on campus, and it's passed now from 2 student government areas. But because the university is putting a hold on some of the understanding of how the memorials are operating on campus, what are we going to do to ensure things like snow removal so that they're protected and the longevity of those programs, we would, again, the Dean of Students would ask again for your support to, that cause is important to students. It has come forward, but because of some pause at the university, we would appreciate any of your support for that. So I thank you very much for your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Feeney.
Do you mind if I ask a follow-up to the question?
Sure thing.
Thanks. Hi, Richard. So I'm curious, I really appreciate that you are bringing back to us that you've had conversations about the West Side Counselor. I'm curious also about the violence prevention position that the Wellness Center was asking for, and if you can give us any sort of sense of how the administration is responding to that.
So regarding the violence prevention response area, we're still at this moment using that as kind of a student initiative. We do have some support through like Title IX areas, but again, from that student, kind of some of that outreach specific programming that happens there. At this point, there's not any consideration, but it will be something that we'll look at. We did look specifically at 5 different, I specifically broke out 5 of the items that you all did vote on. And it included, there was some conversation about some of the music program presentation, the theater, the VPRC. I'm trying to remember all the ones that we specifically pulled out to look at more closely. And the VPRC position is one that we're still kind of divided in, and I don't know that we're at a common place yet.
All right, thanks.
The situation still also, so kind of the reason that it's still a little bit of a challenge is it's the same type of thing. The reason why students also have to fund the medical and the counseling areas at a certain fee, that we just, there's no resource for those types of things either that we value. So the thing is that we're still kind of assuming that kind of in that same kind of category at this moment.
Okay, thanks.
All right.
Is there any further public comment at this time?
Yeah, so I'll speak for the marching band and pet band. Thank you again for spending so much time on us and for the support that you've already given us. We really appreciate that. We're here to answer any questions as you go and make final decisions on the supplemental funding. Am I allowed to ask a question also at this point? Am I allowed to ask questions? I just want to know. Okay, well,
Whether or not we can answer is
maybe.
different, yeah.
Okay. I guess I'm just curious, you had mentioned something about since we're at the end of the quadrennial budget, that there is a possible excess base funding amount from the 24 million or whatever you might have left over, say $500,000. And I just want to know what happens to that excess funding if it's not spent.
If it's not spent, it stays in the student service and activities fund.
So it like rolls over to the next year?
It doesn't go back to the university.
It just stays
It has its
in
own,
S&A?
yeah, it has its own given purpose.
Okay.
So, and that's good because if it just, you know, if it went away somewhere,
Mhm.
that would cause people to just try to spend it on
Mhm.
anything they could.
Mhm.
But that's what happens. So
Okay.
then-
Is that the number, also, is this just a rough estimate? We don't actually know
We
what it's
don't.
going to be? Okay.
And actually, any time then you hear these people talking about asking, I shouldn't say these people. People come and ask, can we carry forward 50,000 for this and 20,000 for that? That reduces my guess of $500,000, but it's still going to be about that area.
Okay.
And just an added both for you and for the committee. That money, when it rolls to the S&A general, that's the money that we can use for supplemental
Right.
funding. That's where our supplemental fundings come from, is that pot
Okay.
of money.
Okay.
Yes.
So I'm here about the graduation celebrations, so if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me and I'll answer them to the best of my ability.
Thank you. Is there any further public comment? All right. Moving on to old business, voting on supplemental funding request 1721, the graduation celebrations and cultural events in the amount of $22,000. Table's open for discussion.
This is the part, and I was going to share this since Michelle's here. I don't know if you still want me to share the email you sent with the updated numbers. Okay.
I'll clarify if we need it.
Yeah, and this was a request that Pat had asked just about because we had the request, which you have now electronically, Pat, if you want.
Oh, yeah, I'll get that.
He'll get there. Based on the numbers, we had asked to see, they don't have it closed yet for this year, so we don't know the actual count for this year. But based on previous year's numbers, I know we have in here, and there are two categories, which I don't know.
Oh, one was because I have Metro's numbers and I have,
Oh, I see. Okay.
Business.
So last year's, for the groups, Metcha had 100 students or attendees? Students.
those are all.
Equal had 46, BSU had 60, FASA had 40, and Poly Central had 80. This year, we do know that's confirmed so far, Metcha has 300 and BSU has 66.
Yeah, I felt that it would be good to be able to do some math and say how much per person is that.
And I've combined that, I just took totals for 2 years running.
So that would be $30 per attendee per Metro, right?
Yes.
Which is one point of information for discussion.
$20.
I have a question for
Brittany?
Callie. How many people are there in Eaton, FAFSA?
How many, you mean how many orgs? How many people in the orgs?
Yeah. how
Well,
many
here's the
students?
thing, the issue with that is, it's not just the orgs, folks who come, so where the orgs may only have 50 people, they can end up with having like 70 students overall come. So it's not just the orgs, because it's open to all students on campus. Each one of those opens to all students on campus. Here in West Side, East Side, everywhere.
Do you have the number by any chance of for how many students like go to the meetings? Or
It varies every week, so if I give you a roundabout, for Metcha, right now they probably have about 75 students that come every week. And it can be higher or just a few numbers lower. FASA right now probably has something like 25. BSU, they're running about, I think they said last week they had something like 45 students. Let's see what else is up there. And Eagles is running anywhere between 45 and 50. But and I do want to say they sent their invitations out, and it goes out to, it's just a shotgun blast.
Dr. Feeney?
I have a question about, like, in the future, was the base funding that was recommended to be allocated, is it going to solve this problem?
Well, you mean base funding for ESC?
Yeah, or
No,
campus
it's not.
activities, or
I
is there like a budget for this in somebody's budget somewhere?
Do you know? Well, I will tell you that I have a meeting with the provost to talk with her to see if we can make it a line item in commencement overall. I don't know how that's going to go, but I am going to her and talk with her about it.
I have a question. How was it paid for last year?
Last year, Dr. Champagne covered the majority of it. I think he covered them all. And that's why he informed us that there was going to be a line item and they would be covered from here on out, of course.
And I believe that was a campus activity.
It was, that covered it. Richard, did you?
Yeah, there were multiple funds that helped support those events. So again, not only did you have the Diversity and Social Justice Office help because it's at the end of the year too. So that's why it's very difficult for them to necessarily say that that money's committed in their budget. Housing contributed, for example, to the Polyfest, for example, at the end of the year. So there were several of those types of budgets. One of the challenges with this proposal, as I know that Dr. Hyatt and Ms. Cyrus presented last week, is that the money that was committed was actually committed from funds that aren't eligible to be funding. And so in the future, there will be from the Dean of Students Office and those that are helping partner will be able to kind of request this from other types of budgets that may have those available in pre-planning work. But at this point, we're kind of responding to something that was committed to that unfortunately was not appropriately funded.
And I think I did say last week that the CDSJ, more than likely CLCE in a couple areas on campus, because this is just going to cover food. So we still have to cover space, set up, clean up, servers. So the centers will be putting in, I think I told you the CDSJ, we committed $500 per org for the other expenses that might come into play. In ESC, we had planned to spend $8,000 for stoves, but it looks like it's going to run more like $12,000. Especially based on the high number for Metro, so.
For me, I think this, like, I know the cause, but like it's a lot of money just looking at what we have. And I know it's open to everyone and parents go, and I feel like this budget should go towards students kind of more, and I could see us funding it for the students. So I looked at numbers, and there's 5, so say there's 200 people, if they're students or not students, that's up to them. And then say every person has a $10 meal, that's gonna be $10,000. That's just a number I came up with. Again, it's hard because, wait, did I do that wrong?
I think you
Yeah.
missed a zero and added one there.
Because 200 times 10.
It's 2,000.
$2,000.
That's all right.
I don't know what I was looking at.
So,
But that's kind of, I mean, I get the cause that if say there's 200, then it would be.
I can tell you that's a poor estimate. I've worked in campus, I've worked here at the CERC as an event support for the last 4 years. Been to Poly Central every year, and it's huge. I mean, they fill the ballroom basically, probably closer to 800, would you say? I mean,
They said 750 last year.
yeah, it's, these are super awesome. I mean, I know that they told you how awesome they were, but from a student perspective, they're incredible. Really cool celebrations, put on by the students, for the students. It sucks that this money was promised, and it can't go to you guys because I can personally attest how incredible they are. My only reservation about this, because like I said, I really like all these, is that we're getting close. We're going to have a discussion about how much we want to dip in, or if we do want to dip in. I just feel like my first priority personally on this committee is to the marching band and pet band, because the only reason we didn't give them the money in base funding, I felt, was because we were going to give it to them in supplementals. And so I like both. I like all 3 of the things on the agenda right now. I just feel like I don't want to do this one if we're not going to do the other one. So maybe we have a different conversation. That's how I feel.
Although I will say, for point of order, that is a different supplemental request should be saved for the other supplemental requests and not factor into this decision.
And then I had a question is, what event did you say? just forgot.
Polyfest.
Is Polyfest the celebration or is that a whole different event?
They're doing both.
Okay.
So they've combined theirs because their families come for Polyfest. So they're going to do their graduation celebration at the same time.
Oh, okay, I thought they were different.
So one thing that Michelle, I think, alluded to, but I want to make sure it's clear. It's not that the university doesn't have other money. It's that the university doesn't have any other money that can be used this way. S&A can be used to host things. And there's a prohibition on the university hosting or gifting money from tuition or from the state. So this is, that doesn't mean you have to fund it, but that this isn't out of, what's the word I'm looking for here? This isn't like that they're asking just to try to get funds from anywhere they can. This is kind of the one place that they probably could get it. Not to add more pressure to you, but.
It's also simple to marching band up there because they cannot ask for money from other places except here.
Well, I think the pep band and marching band could ask for money out of instruction, but I don't know that they could get it.
But again, for point of order, those should be saved for those
Right.
supplemental requests.
Well,
Go for it.
say, if Luke has this concern, why don't we table this and move to the marching band and then see what we have? Yes, there's a motion.
There's a motion on the table to table this and come back to it later this meeting.
Yes.
Okay.
If he sees it as a priority, or if we need to figure that out first, let's do that.
Is there a second?
Sorry, Dan.
Brittany seconds. Is there any discussion? Jacqueline?
I'm just wondering, like, you know how we talked about dipping in? If we dip in, can we cover both? Or no?
If the committee chose to, it's up to you all as the committee on how much you
Are
want
we
to
able to
increase the
discuss that?
supplemental funding.
Are we able to discuss like amount, like to have that conversation right now, or would that be a point of order?
If we tabled it, the discussion on hand is about the motion.
Yeah. The committee has the ability to table the current request to have that discussion and make that decision now if the committee wants to.
Is there any further discussion on the motion at hand? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? Any abstentions? 2 abstentions. All right, supplemental funding request 1721 has been tabled until,
Following.
following the pep ban. All right, moving on to voting on supplemental funding. Yes.
I would say based on, you
Yeah.
may want to entertain a motion to see if the committee would like to discuss increasing the supplemental funding based on the comments.
I would also like to entertain a motion to discuss the raising of the supplemental budget. Brittany moves, is there a second? Jacqueline seconds, is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes.
I have a question. So, say student government has $1,000 rollover, that money goes into a pot and then that pot is split up for supplemental funding throughout the 4 years.
Yes.
Okay. So if we took more.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Not necessarily.
Oh, you mean evenly divided, like,
Yeah, we don't take the $500,000 and split it in 4, and that's all there is.
But that's where the money comes from?
That's part of where it comes from, but each year, if we enroll more students than we planned on, there's,
to clarify are you asking if that's where the money for supplemental funding comes from?
Yeah.
Yes. Because you're answering where the money for the pot comes from.
yeah, but I think what you're getting at is if you approve to spend part of this amount that's going to be swept back, will you preclude yourself from being able to do supplementals in the future? And I don't see that as the outcome.
So it wouldn't take away from, say, next year's supplemental?
I
if we
don't
took
see that
some
it
out?
would.
I would say will depend on how much
Yeah.
you all would spend, but I will tell you right now that we would strongly advise against going anywhere near that, so I don't think it would be an issue.
Right.
Is there a number for how much we spent last quarter? Is there a way to look?
Last quarter, like
Yeah.
winter quarter,
Yeah, for supplemental.
is right.
Oh, yeah.
Sure, well, you can go,
I mean, it's pretty much everything on there except for those top three. Those top three were fall quarter.
yeah,
Oh, okay.
well, that one says November.
Well, let's see,
Yeah. Yeah, $25,000. And then this last quarter must have been 70, but 24 of it was source.
So about 50,000.
So I guess one way of looking at it would be if you didn't have any of these 3 supplemental requests, I think you have just enough to get through the year, right?
spent just over 100,000 winter quarter.
I added these 3 up, and I got 206.
Yep.
That's right. Right in there, 26.
So if we had 150 that the committee had recommended as the supplemental pool, to recommend a higher number, you'd have to make a decision on enough headroom to afford these 3 and whichever others you think might be coming, right? Or you could have approved to spend more at a future meeting. You might consider just getting it out of the way right now.
And then any we don't use would be rolled over back.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's no requirement to use all.
no,
Please don't view that as a requirement whenever you set for supplemental.
We wouldn't even really be in this situation, I don't think. Even with the graduation celebrations request, we would still be within our 150,000.
Yeah.
But we asked marching and pep band to come back for supplemental requests. That was our recommendation. So
Yep.
we kind of put ourselves in this situation, and now we've got to make a decision based on our own recommendation. So to me, I think it seems pretty clear that we should at least dip into reserves that 206,000. If we don't go a penny over that, as far as I'm concerned, that's fine. But we want to keep whatever we have left, 30,000, maybe on top of that for the rest of the spring quarter. I don't know what you guys think.
It also seems like it's going to be a really durable investment, that it's going to solve a problem for quite a number of years for the band.
I don't know if it's very responsible, more than doubling our whole entire budget for, I know we voted on telling them to come back, but to more than double the budget, I don't think that's the best idea.
Dr. Fee?
Did you miss the meeting? So we, I think maybe to fill you in a little bit on why we made that decision, it was just a very difficult task to try and make sure to meet everybody's needs. I mean, everybody had more needs than we could fill. And we really felt like we could help fund other smaller programs, base fund smaller programs, multiple other smaller programs if we trimmed their budget by a little bit and thought that, okay, what they need is more of a one-time thing. We also, another part of my rationale for asking them to come back for supplemental was that the sort of procedure seemed to be that with base funding, once a group gets a certain amount, then they're sort of they could be just considered for a 5% increase the next base funding cycle. And we wouldn't necessarily want to set that standard or to have their base funding go up by that much, or be next base funding cycle we would potentially have to cut their funding, and that's not very comfortable to do sometimes. So I think part of our rationale was that we wanted to make sure that we had enough funding to fund other ongoing programs that maybe didn't require quite as much. We wanted to make sure that we were supporting the pep band and marching band, and we saw an opportunity with the carry forward and thought that we could do it with supplemental. So that was kind of our rationale. If anybody has anything to add to that, or
We did fund them more than what they asked for though, in the supplemental. No, in the base funding for the band.
Wait,
Can I clarify? We
No?
funded them for more than what the 5% increase would have been. We
Yeah.
didn't
Yeah.
fund them for more than they asked.
Oh, yeah. That.
we funded
Just to
them more.
clarify.
Okay, so yeah, we funded them more than some other groups. Their increase was more than some other groups.
Yeah, they got an increase, is what I was trying to
Yeah.
say. It came out weird.
And then technically, if we did pass this, it would go up to the county finance.
Yeah, it still has to go through the university's process, the business and finance committee, the cabinet, the board of trustees.
Specifically, the marching band would have to be, while we,
Well, the pep band was
Pep band's
just slightly
26.
over 25.
oh yeah, that's right.
So there's another set of review and consideration.
For those two.
3 more steps, really. I think it'll make it through those. Because it does seem to solve a long-term problem and put the money to work. So.
I will put out there, I know why we're discussing this right now, since effective, but again, the discussion now is for whether or not and what amount we're increasing the supplemental for. Well, I know you all are trying to determine whether we will fund those and that may factor in. Just keeping that in mind that this isn't the discussion for funding those yet.
So to go around the other way around, if the amount that is, lapses and all these other things comes in at $500,000, which I think is a rough number, you could look at it and say, well, let's allocate some percentage of that. 5%, 95%, 50%. What kind of seems like a reasonable, approach? Because, what, were you going to say something?
I will cautiously say this and I'll let you add anything you want in there. That reserve amount that we have that has the money that's left over at the end of each base funding and that goes in there is money that can only be used for supplemental requests. We cannot use that for base funding.
True.
So the important part for the committee to know is that money is there for when we do have increased needs or one-time situations that are outside of control of specific areas, which is where they come to us within that. But that money can only be spent on supplemental requests. Now, we don't put it all out there because we don't want the committee each year to fully exhaust that within 1 year, which is where we set our supplemental at the beginning of the year, is really based on what we are projecting we have available, which some of that, again, as Pat mentioned last week, has changed based on the debt reserve changes, but also based on our prior year funding. Although we have had years where we get large funding requests that will come in that may be $90,000, the committee can choose to fund those $90,000 and increase because that may be a one-time funding, but the committee has also in the past been fiscally responsible sometimes in only funding portions of that within there. So just to be aware, while the funds are there, they can only be used for supplemental funding, but we also don't want to fully exhaust it.
And it's not uncommon for a supplemental funding thing to come up that is without, it's so large that the organization can't handle it. I remember the radio station needed a tower a couple years ago, right? There's no way the radio station could come up with $250,000 for a tower. So it came out of a supplemental funding. And it was good to have that money there to do it.
And those would be ones that we would anticipate if those types of things do come up. We're not going to know that starting in September and October. So we're doing our, like $150,000 was based on funding for what we had traditionally been seeing the past few years, which was travel to conferences and things along those lines. So when you do get a request like that, while it's still up to the committee, it would not be out of the norm for you all to increase supplemental funding to offset those increased costs.
Based on years past, without looking at anything on this agenda, would you say that at 32.5, at this point in the school year, we're about where we should be percent-wise, based on what we allotted for the year? Does it seem about normal?
I will say the hard part with about normal is that it has changed every year, including the past 4 years, the funding cycle, have been the first time that we have had been funding supplemental at 150,000. Before that, it was, and I look around realizing no one else was here, so never mind. Before that, I believe it was 250,000. We decreased it because we gave funds to the music department and to Club Senate, so that way we would have less supplemental. So before, we were spending $250,000 a year on supplemental requests. Giving that money, we were hoping they would offset it. And in the past 3 years, that has been about where we have been. I think last year we ended only with a couple $1,000s left. So 150,000 has been about where we are within those. We also haven't had large requests needing to come in that are unforeseen. So with that, we'll say if it was a normal year, $150,000, normally we get the heavier requests in spring, at least based on the past 4 years. That fall we get several requests, winter it starts to get more requests, and then spring we get a lot of people coming in because of the end of the year celebrations and some other conferences. So winter and spring are typically heavier than fall. Now the hard part this year is very odd because we only had 3 supplemental in fall, and then we had over $100,000 that we allocated during winter quarter. So we spent more than 2/3 of our supplemental in 1 quarter. So I don't know if that really answered your question. Okay.
Yeah. And I guess where I was leading with that question is, if it seems like if we feel that we're on track supplemental budget-wise, I guess we're not allowed to talk about these groups, but if I just pull a number out of my head here, and we decide to increase it on, say, $206,000, that might be a good starting point, and then we can just try and wrap the rest of spring out with whatever we have, with what we still have. I think we just kind of take a wash. Just an idea.
Great.
Also, let's say we did increase it that amount and we passed all 3, and then the Business and Finance Committee decided to decline it. Does that mean that the bottom 2 would be declined, but the celebrations would still go through?
Well, I think they would, how would that work? The celebrations would still go through, and then each of the other 2 would be considered individually, right? And might be approved by.
Is that because it's over 25?
Yeah.
Because of their size.
They all still have to be approved. Some have to.
They do, yeah.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, they do. And it's actually though, it's the board that has to approve over 25 board of trustees. That's the point that they could be turned down. But
Well, I would say technically they could be turned down
sure.
at any point, but
So can we approve all 3 of them for that?
well, right now we are determining whether and what amount to increase supplemental funding. Because right now we have $32,580.05 available in supplemental funds for the rest of this fiscal year. So the discussion right now, and I would say, and this is just to be straightforward, not whether you're going to fund these or not, that we would probably want to just increase it by a round number, not to go in and specifically do the exact dollar amount that's on there. So if you want to increase it by, for example, not my recommendation, but an example, you're going to increase it by $200,000, or if you want to increase it by $210,000 or $206,000, instead of specifically increasing it simply by the exact dollar amount of these 3 requests. Because we will have other requests that will most likely come up. We don't want to constantly have to go back if it gets to that point. And that's just from a budget standpoint too.
So the number I came up with initially was $206,000, $206,584.
You want to round it up or round it down?
Down.
Or not?
Well, if you were going to round, I would round it up because we might have to go through this again in May, if there's another supplemental that exceeds it by $4,000, just to save the consternation.
Dr. Feeney?
Yeah, I would agree that we should probably pad it a little bit. Just because we've had it doesn't mean we have to spend it.
Right.
But thinking back to the previous years, there were always big requests at the end of the year for like Pride or other really important events. And it would just be, we just have to go through this again, if we wanted to consider those requests at all. But again, just because we give ourselves a little bit more of a cushion than $206,000, $206,000, doesn't mean we have to spend that extra. So it's just to give ourselves the option of spending it.
So would like $212,000 be logical? Yeah, that's what I'm doing. Since you have everything.
Just put before 225. We'll just
225, that's one.
225.
It puts us a little bit above 50 for the rest of the year, gives us a little room to work.
Is that a motion, Spencer?
Yes, sure.
All right, there's a motion on the table to increase the supplemental budget by $225,000. Is there a second? Jacqueline seconds. Is there any discussion? Is there any discussion about this motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. Motion passes. So now what is a supplemental budget?
Well, I guess
Yeah.
we can split each day. Okay, so now we have
$257,000.
257,000.
Yes. Yep. Okay, moving on to voting on supplemental funding request 1722, the marching band in the amount of $157,892.51. Table's open for discussion.
Yeah, we've talked about this a lot. I feel like it's pretty straightforward. We know where the money's going.
I move to approve the full amount.
Okay. There's a motion on the table. Dr. Kennedy seconds. Is there any discussion?
I would point out that's probably best that Dr. Kennedy does not second,
All right. Elena seconds. Is there any discussion?
just for transparency's sake.
Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? Any abstentions? 2 abstentions. Motion passes. Moving on to voting on supplemental funding request 1723, the PEP band in the amount of $26,692.33. Table's open for discussion.
I move to approve the full amount.
There's a motion on the table to approve the full amount. Is there a second? Ton seconds. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? Any abstentions? 2 abstentions. Motion passes. Moving back to voting on supplemental funding request 1721, the graduation celebrations and cultural events.
Before we jump to that, I will propose this as the advisor, but it's really up to you, to accompany the marching band and pep band, simply because with us funding those, knowing that those equipment and pieces may all need to be replaced at the same time frame in the future, that it may be beneficial to put in there that S&A is in support of this, and that the funding is because we have the funds available, but that may not be the case in 18 to 20 years. Simply because I want to make sure that most of us will not probably be sitting here at this table in 18 to 20 years. And that if someone coming forward will not expect or anticipate that S&A is going to constantly be able to fund this at this level every 20 years. Probably, yes.
Is it a motion just to amend?
It's simply to put that, to go along with it, so we have it on file, that if you all are in support, that it'll be in the minutes that goes with that.
I'd like to entertain a motion to put,
What I said.
yeah, what we've discussed about in the minutes.
So moved.
Luke moves, is there a second? Lane seconds, is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes.
Committee can still do that in 20 years, but. Back up.
After, once they're born.
Yeah, that's true. Never mind.
Moving back to voting on supplemental funding request 1721, the graduation celebrations and cultural events in the amount of $22,000. Table's open for discussion. Brittany?
So move the full amount.
Brittany moves to approve the full amount. Con seconds. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? Any abstentions? 3 abstentions. Motion passes. Moving on to section 7B, voting on base funding requests for the Veterans Center carry forward in the amount of $20,000.
This is not this is specific because we will be getting more of these. In fact, there's another one coming up in just a minute. That the carry forward discussion, as a reminder for you all, really we want to be mindful of not simply letting areas keep money because they want to keep the money, only if there's an intentional plan and if there was a logical reason they weren't able to spend that this funding cycle. Again, I can't give my feedback on any of these, but if there's something to where there is something that they were anticipating the money to go towards and was out of their control that pushed it to the next fiscal year, in my mind, that is something that you all as a committee, I would recommend that we go with that. If it's an area that just wants to keep the money because they would like to have more money next year, or it's something they want to do next year, those are more where we would request them to come for a supplemental request next year.
And that's what the guidelines say.
Yes.
So that they present
So
this
there's a
next
reminder
week.
for the committee.
Yes. And as a point of clarification, this is from their base funds, correct?
Yes.
Table's open for discussion.
So this is what they already have, right? Just, it doesn't take anything.
Yeah, this request is to allow the $20,000 that's sitting there to carry forward in that account to the next fiscal year so they can use it for the Veterans Memorial.
Yeah.
And they have more than 20,000.
Yes. Anything over this 20,000 would be swept back. Unless they come at a request.
I move to approve the full amount.
There's a motion on the table. Is there a second? Trey seconds. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? Any abstentions? 4 abstentions. Motion passes. Moving on to section 8, new business, the ASCWU carry forward.
Yay, that's me. So I printed you guys some pictures. Pass them around. So I'm here with the same thing Ruben had last week. I've been working with a committee for 2 years on the Veterans Memorial. One picture is the location that it's planning on being. One picture is the pillars with the person standing next to them to see how tall it is. And then the third picture is like the whole memorial. And we're hoping to have it done sooner than it has been. So we allocated the money, but we didn't get it done in time for the rollover. So we're hoping to roll it over so that the people who work on it next can finish it up and get it going. Any questions?
You know the amount at which, because we will need to know that. Is this coming from the ACW in general, or is there some for each of the?
It's from the general budget, $40,000.
This is from the student government budget.
Yes, and it's already been allocated towards this project. It just hasn't been spent yet because we're almost done with the project. It's just not finalized yet.
Are there any questions? All right. right, thank you. We'll be voting on this next week. Moving on to section 9, other business communications received.
The only one that I received, which I'll also read even though he's in the room, was the official wording that I said last week we would get regarding the our base funding. It's from Interim Dean Richard DeShields. It says the Dean of Student Success Office supports the proposals submitted for S&A funding. One of the areas that we will work on future funding is the West Side advisor position. While we believe that the services students are getting is different than traditional advising at the university that is funded through state dollars, and because it provides additional support beyond the traditional advising, we do think it fits within the scope of the service and activities fee guidelines. So that was the official wording that I said I would check.
Any other communications received?
Anything on your end, Pat?
Moving on to section 10, public comment second call. Is there any public comment at this time?
I mean, we just want to thank you
Yeah.
so much.
It's a lot of time for us.
Moving on to section 11, adjournment. I'd like to entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting. Trey moves, Spencer seconds. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? Any abstentions? This meeting is adjourned at 6:27 p.m. Next meeting will be on April 12th, 5:30, Wednesday.
Make sure you